I'm the oldest of 5 siblings, and so I think it's something that comes up, I guess, because of that. It's a lot of my growing up was with my other siblings, kind of me babysitting them or being harassed by them or me harassing them. So, in fact, the story that I read, the last one, Windeye, all the details about the toy box and locking the kids locking each other in the toy box is something my sister and I used to do. The sister is a year younger than me, and I have no idea what we did. We used to have this toy box that had a little cubby at the bottom, and you could just barely crawl in and fit, and then the other person could come behind you and close the door, and then we would go to the door of the room and say, "All right, I'm leaving now. I'm going out," and the person in the toy box would go, "No, no, don't go!" And then you'd just be really silent for a while until there was panic. And the time, it seemed like that was really fun. And now it's weird to think about. So I do think it's just so much of my growing up was in the company of my siblings that probably that's why I returned to that. So I read that story once when my sister was in the audience and she burst out laughing in the middle of it. It's a growing up story.
I've read Windeye, but I can't remember where. Was it published somewhere?
It was published, Pen America. I want to ask you about, you talked about, or the introduction talked about how there's different forms in your book. Can you talk about how you put it together?
I wish I had a really great answer, but I thought, what is like a theme I could build a collection around? And I realized I had this body of work about Haiti. And so I started putting it together that way. And so some of it is nonfiction. There's one poem, though I am not a poet at all. So I call it a poem because it looks like a poem, but a poet would look at it and say, hell no, that's not a poem. Stop lying. So it was just a collection of work that I felt sort of all spoke to similar themes about being Haitian or Haitian American, or at least one perspective. There are many perspectives, and that's how the collection sort of came about.
Roxane, I'm a big fan of your this essays, and I really love the zombie story you read, which is very on trend, but it twisted it in a different way. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how pop culture influences your writing.
Absolutely, I love pop culture. I know a lot of writers sort of like the I don't own a television genre, but I own a television and it's on all the time, even if I'm not watching it. But like, I'm excited that my DVR is recording General Hospital right now, so I'm just keeping it real. I think that pop culture is really interesting, and I think that it says something about who we are as a people and the kinds of things that we're interested in. I think it reveals some interesting trends and some disturbing trends, and so I like to think a lot about pop culture and sort of what it means. I think that it's too easy to dismiss pop culture as, oh, it's just pop culture and it doesn't mean anything. I think it means a lot, especially when you look at sort of what young people are consuming, and young women in particular. I think that pop culture is most damaging to them, and so I'm really interested in sort of looking at that and sort of trying to sort of bring awareness to some of these problematic and pervasive ways that pop culture influences people.
I just started reading your stuff. I read The Wavering Knife, part of it. I'm not sure of your background. Are you from Utah?
Yeah, I grew up in Utah, and I'm an excommunicated Mormon.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that, how that affected, some of the darkness that seeps through, not just seeps flows through.
Yeah, no, I think that Mormonism is a curious religion in some ways, and that it does have this strange relationship to violence, I would say. And I grew up with things like the Meadows Massacre that you talked about, which was a bunch of people who were Mormon dressed up as Indians and then slaughtered a bunch of settlers who were not Mormon. And so there is this kind of weird relationship to violence in Mormon culture that I'm intrigued by. I don't think it's a simple thing at all. Like John Krakauer talks about it. So I think that had a big influence on me. I was raised Mormon, go back about 6 generations. I was formally excommunicated because of my fiction, and so I have a very strange relationship to it. The other book I published recently is a book called Immobility, and it takes place in a kind of devastated version of Utah. I spent a lot of time on Google Maps looking at what was there and figuring out what it would look like if it was devastated. It was very satisfying to me. So I do think I continue to have this very complicated relationship to the culture. I think it really shaped me in a lot of ways as well. I would think I have. I'm terrified of the possibility of Mitt Romney becoming president. I don't think that'll happen, but it is scary too. And I do think it's like I think everybody. Your relationship to your past and how you grew up and the cultures that you're involved in is pretty multi-local. It's pretty complicated.
Is the rest of your family still?
Of the five of us, I'm also from a weird Mormon family. My father was the head of the Democratic Party in Utah, and I would go to high school and people would say, "Now wait a minute, your family is Democrats, right?" I'd say yes, and they say, "Well, and they're Mormon still? Is that possible? Can you be a Democrat and be Mormon?" And I'd say, "Well, yes, you can." And I'd say, "No, I don't think you can." And so I had all those conversations when I was growing up. And so I always felt like I was in a very strange relationship to the culture at large. And in fact, of the five of us, I think four of us pretty much left the church. I'm the only one who's formally excommunicated, but pretty much everybody else has stepped out. I have two daughters. One daughter has become very committedly Mormon, and very much is involved in that. The other has stepped completely outside of it. So I do have continued, and extended families overall and things like that. So it's complicated.
My question's for Roxane. I know you're a proponent of including women and minorities into things, especially like lists, year-end lists. At what point does that risk become tokenism?
That's a great question. I don't make a point of including women and minorities. I just make a point of reading broadly so that women and minorities are naturally included. And I think that's why so many lists are so terrible, because people don't read broadly. So I think it becomes tokenism when I say, okay, I'm going to go and find a black writer today. I'm going to go find an Indian writer tomorrow. And then on Thursday, maybe I'll sort of give queer literature a pass. I just try to read every genre. And I try to read writers from many walks of life. Because I used to not. I used to be very narrowly. And then I realized one day I was looking at my bookshelf and I was like, this is awkward. So I wanted to get better. And so I've gotten better. Now it's easy for me to sort of come up with lists that are inclusive. And then people call me up, okay, we need a black writer to feature. And I'm like, really? Who can you give me? So then I give them a name anyway. And I think that's when it becomes tokenism, sort of when you become the go-to person to get the call because no one else is doing that. But I think that, yeah, it becomes tokenism when sort of you're not worrying about the quality of the writing first or what the message is, and you're worrying about the writer and who they are. But when you look at the blandness and the uniformity of some of the things going on, I think we can err on the side of tokenism.
I was wondering what, if anything in particular, motivates you to write a short story versus something that's more nonfiction versus a poem?
That's a good question. Essays, my essays tend to be sort of responsive to whatever's angering me in the moment. And I have a lot of anger, so they're very responsive. With fiction, I try to sort of tackle bigger issues, but I want to sort of make a spoonful of sugar to make that medicine go down. So I like to write about difficult subjects through fiction because I think that's an easier way sometimes to sort of reach the kinds of people you want to reach. And so it's really about sort of the kind of audience I want to reach that determines whether I'm going to write fiction or nonfiction.
Ryan, I have a question about the mode in which you write and the tradition that it's got to be a fairly old tradition of what we call fabulous writing, or departures from reality. I waver between being satisfied by some very realistic fiction, but getting extremely excited by fiction that departs. I'm a big fan of Shelley Jackson, Dupernay, Angela Carter, going back. Your work excites me very much. It's very dark at times. But where is this going? And Stephen Millhouse, there's another so I'm just sort of following it and feeling it, but I'm not sure.
As a reader, I tend to read across a lot of the generic lines. I mean, I'm actually interested in a lot of realist fiction as well, and I guess it's the thing I see happening now is that there's more and more kind of acceptance of fiction that is moving in a fabulous way, that is, you know, kind of taking, you know, and often I think it starts in a kind of realistic space and then starts to just change and impact it a little bit. You know, as a human, I've never been that confident in my belief in the reality of reality. And so I think as a result, that space feels very natural for me in terms of getting into it. But I have lots of doubts about how real the real is. But I do think that kind of the one thing that's happened with the larger culture, and it is due sometimes to things going on in popular culture, there has been more of an acceptance of pieces that kind of create a reality and then compromise it or complicate it in some way. And you know, I would never have suspected that the New Yorker would be publishing people like Ben Marcus or George Saunders, you know, 10, 15 years ago. It seems very strange, but the fact that that's available does suggest there's a kind of larger trend that's going on. And we'll probably have a backlash at some point, like people are moving in a different direction and responding to it. So, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my fiction is really about questioning reality and what reality is and what it can do, what it means. And I personally find that exciting just because I find it also unsettling, but unsettling in a way that is exciting.
So I think I just wanted to ask one more question unless somebody else does. I was just wondering who you're excited about reading right now, Roxane.